Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. Narrated by Darci Cole. Chapter 1. The Girl. In the middle of the ocean, there was a girl who lived upon a rock. This was not an ocean like the one you have imagined, nor was the rock like the one you have imagined. The girl, however, might be as you imagined, assuming you imagined her as thoughtful, soft-spoken, and overly fond of collecting cups. Men often described the girl as having hair the color of wheat. Others would call it the color of flax, or occasionally the color of honey. The girl wondered why men so often used food to describe women's features. There seemed to be a hunger to such men that was best avoided. In her estimation, light brown was sufficiently descriptive, though the hue of her hair was not its most interesting trait. That would instead be her hair's unruliness. Each morning she heroically tamed it with brush and comb, then muzzled it with a ribbon and a tight braid. Yet still some strands always found way to escape, and would wave free in the wind, eagerly greeting everyone she passed. The girl had been given the unfortunate name of Glorf upon her birth. Don't judge, it was a family name. But her wild hair earned her the name everyone knew her by, Tress. That moniker was, in Tress's estimation, the most interesting thing about her. Tress had been raised to possess a certain inalienable pragmatism. Such is a common failing among those who live on dour, lifeless islands from which they can never leave. When you are greeted each day by a black stone landscape, it influences your perspective on life. The island was shaped vaguely like an old man's crooked finger, emerging from the ocean to point toward the horizon. It was made entirely of barren black saltstone, and was large enough for a fair-sized town and a duke's mansion. Though locals called the island the Rock, its name on the maps was Diggin's Point. Nobody remembered who Diggin was anymore, but he had obviously been a clever fellow, for he'd left the rock soon after naming it, and had never returned. In the evenings, Tress would often sit on her porch and sip salty tea from one of her favorite cups, while looking out over the deep green ocean. As the sun set, she'd wonder about the people who visited the rock in their ships. And yes, I did say the ocean was green. Also, it was not wet. We're getting there. As I said, none of the rock's residents were allowed to leave. A king somewhere claimed the island, and he considered it vital for reasons that involved important military phrases like strategic resupply and friendly anchorage and potential vacation home. Not that anybody in their right mind would consider the rock a tourist destination. The black saltstone rubbed off and got into everything. It also made most kinds of agriculture impossible, eventually tainting any soil moved to the town from off-island. The only food the island grew came from compost vats. While the rock did have important wells that brought water from a deep aquifer, something that visiting ships required, the equipment that worked the salt mines belched a constant stream of black smoke into the air. In summary, the atmosphere was dismal, the ground wretched, and the views depressing. Oh, and have I mentioned the deadly spores? Diggin's Point lay near the verdant Lunagri. Lunagries, you should know, refer to the places where one of the 12 moons hang in the sky around Tress's planet, in oppressively low geosynchronous orbits. In other words, they never move. Big enough to fill a full third of the sky, one of the 12 is always visible, no matter where you travel, dominating your view, like if you had a wart on your eyeball. The locals worshipped those 12 moons as gods, which we can all agree is far more ridiculous than whatever it is you worship. However, it's easy to see where the superstition began, considering the spores that the moons dropped upon the land. They'd filtered down from the Lunagri, visible from the island some 50 or 60 miles away. That's as close as you ever wanted to get to the Lunagri. A great shimmering fountain of colorful motes, vibrant and exceedingly dangerous. The spores filled the world's oceans, creating vast seas not of water, but of alien dust. Ships sailed that dust like ships sail water here, and you should not find that so unusual. How many other planets have you visited? Perhaps they all sail in oceans of pollen, and your home is the freakish one. The spores were only dangerous if you got them wet, which is rather a problem considering the number of wet things that leak from human bodies, even when they're healthy. The least bit of water could cause the spores to sprout explosively, and the results could range from uncomfortable to deadly. Breathe in a burst of verdant spores, for example, and your saliva would send vines growing up out your mouth, or in more interesting cases, into your sinuses and out around your eyes. The spores could be rendered inert by two things, salt or silver. Hence the reason why the locals didn't terribly mind the savory taste of their water or their food. It meant they were safe, and they'd teach their children this ever so important rule. Salt and silver halt the killer. An acceptable little poem if you're the sort of barbarian who enjoys slant rhymes. Regardless, with the spores, the smoke, and the salt, one can perhaps see why the king needed a law requiring the population to remain on the rock. The place was so inhospitable, even the smog found it depressing. Ships visited periodically to do repairs, drop off waste for the compost vats, and take on new water. But each strictly obeyed the king's rules. No locals were to be taken off of Diggins Point. Ever. And so Tress would sit on her steps in the evenings, watching ships sail toward the horizon. A column of spores would drop from the lunagree, and the sun would move out from behind the moon and creep toward the horizon. She'd sip salty tea from a cup with horses painted on it, and she'd think to herself, "There's a beauty to this, actually. I like it here, and I think I shall be fine to remain here all my life."